To me, immigration poses the single greatest long-term, and I'm talking from their own words, 30 to 40 years out threat to me as a gun owner, to you as a gun owner, wherever you may be, and to you, Neil, as a gun owner, because we know why Barack Obama's doing this. We know why he's willing to violate federal law, why he is why he is literally violating his oath of office, which he's done many times. But in this case, why he wants to give amnesty to millions of illegal people here in this country. We know exactly why he wants to do that. It will cement a Democrat majority, by their own words, for the next 30-plus years. And let me make this very clear. It is the Democrat Party as an institution that is coming after your guns.
Well, I mean, we saw what happened in California under the Clinton administration, where they basically waved in 2 million new immigrants. They administered the oath of office for citizenship in Spanish. They waived all the requirements. And basically those 2 million voters in California turned a state that was a lock for the Republican Party and over again, the home of Nixon, the home of Reagan. And now it's a Democratic one-party state forever. And they're just going to move that across the country, that model.
Let's go right to Larry Pratt. Larry, of course, is the executive director of the Gun Owners of America. We will waste no time. Larry, how the heck are you?
Mark, just great to be with you. Thanks so much for having me with you and you all.
I personally believe, I've stated it publicly on the show before, that we are witnessing the death of progressive liberalism in America. Socialist progressive liberalism, I believe, is dying. Americans have seen it. They've tasted it. They're about to get a taste of it over the next 2 years that they never thought they would see in this country. And I believe they've had enough. And I believe my theory is correct when you go back and you look at what happened in November. I stated it long before that. Having said that, we will see an onslaught, like you said, from this man because progressive liberalism is in its death throes, that they are going to do everything they can and throw everything they can and will at the wall to see if it sticks. Let's go to David Codry, and I'll go right up the phone line here. David, your thoughts on that?
Well, progressive liberalism may be in its death throes because they're a bunch of wimps, but communism certainly is not in its death throes, and I think that we're going to see a resurgence of that when we get on to the next topic, which we want to be able to discuss. This whole business that amnesty is, in fact, the seminal threat to gun rights that we're facing in the next couple of decades once Jed Johnson's mandate that they have earned the right to be citizens comes true. And this is where we need to talk about the Republicans that have not been opposing things and that have actually been greasing the skids to make it happen, whether it's for cheap labor or for whatever reason. But the bottom line is we had this Oregon Democrat, Kurt Schrader, who went on record saying that it is the issue for the millennials and it is going to determine who controls the country for the next 20 or 30 years. And it's time for the gun groups to join Larry Pratt and Gun Owners of America, the only national gun group out there raising this flag and raising this warning to acknowledge that this is, in fact, a threat and to get their members on board with it and to start putting pressure on the Republicans.
Couldn't have said it better. We're going to cover that for the remainder of the hour when we come back. Larry Pratt, of course, is the executive director of the Gun Owners of America. You've seen Larry Pratt on virtually every network, telling it like it is, all of the cable networks, and he goes into enemy territory and just smiles and tells the truth while they just sit there dumbfounded and don't know how to respond. Larry, love watching you on all the programs. In particular, I really, as you know, enjoy watching you with what's his name, Hardball.
With Chris Matthews.
Yeah, we go back a few years on that when you rescued Skip Coryell at the Second Amendment March back in 2010 when he got blindsided by Chris and you came on and just drove Tingle Leg Boy crazy with the truth about the march there in Washington. You don't want to sit too
close to Matthews or you make a little spittle on your face.
Yeah, these guys are great, and I love the way you handle them.
Part of the occupational hazard that most of us have to face at one time or another.
From time to time, no doubt. All right, let's talk about immigration. David mentioned it. You're very well aware of it. The fear is, as David alluded to in the previous segment, we all know why Barack Obama wants to grant amnesty to millions of illegal aliens here in this country. Am I allowed to say illegal aliens?
On this show, I hope you are.
Oh, good. Thank you very much. We all know why he wants to grant amnesty to illegal aliens, and that is, as David said, to clearly create a Democrat majority for years because they know how these people will vote. He is going to create a underclass, handout, gimme, dependency class from people who will vote for he and his party, or his party, I should say, down the road for decades to come. This is a threat to gun owners, Larry. Why?
First of all, we've seen that survey data indicates some 85% of the illegals, were they to vote, would vote Democrat. And at the national level, really without exception anymore, that means anti-Second Amendment. And you actually kind of sketched the larger picture. A dependent class that depends on the government for their income, for all kinds of financial and other assistance, is not generally of a mind to be able to protect itself, which is, after all, the most important part about living, is staying alive from one minute to the next in case some dirtbag wants to try to terminate you. And if you don't think enough of your own freedom to take charge of that aspect of your existence, then of course you're likely to expect handouts and more because you have a dependent mentality. I remember talking to one of the columnists at Town Hall now, Mike Adams, who had been a liberal, thoroughgoing liberal professor down in North Carolina, and some friends of his were murdered. And he had to pass the site alongside the road where that had happened. And after a while, it started eating on him, and he thought, well, what if something like that were to happen to me? Gee, I guess I'd better get a gun. And it was that, and he said that he agreed with my conclusion when we were doing an interview on my show, that, yeah, that really was when the door opened to becoming a conservative, to taking responsibility for the whole of my life. Once I realized that the cops, much as they might try, they're not going to be able to help me for maybe, say, a good 5 minutes on an optimal basis. Well, then what am I going to do in that 5 minutes or however long it might take for help to get there? And that's when he bought his gun, and that's when, without knowing it at the time, he became a conservative.
Fascinating story. Without knowing it at the time, he tasted freedom.
Responsibility and freedom.
Responsibility and freedom. And tasting responsibility and freedom is, in fact, what makes one, or is the beginning anyway, of making a conservative. Great point. David Codrea, what about that train of thought that says, let's be realistic here. Predominantly, we're talking about Mexicans coming to this country illegally, and South Americans, but mainly Mexicans, who do not enjoy gun rights in Mexico. What about that train of thought that says, these are people who are going to come here, and because they have been restricted their gun rights, there have been no gun rights most of their lives, that this is a right that they might embrace. How do you answer that?
Well, we have people from all different cultures coming into this country, some legally, some illegally, and they seem to import their traditions and their expectations from government with them. There used to be the saying, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. Now, when in Rome, change it to your suitability. So many people living in states like Arizona or Montana have Californians that have fouled the nest that come to the freer states, and all of a sudden they want to impose the same type of nanny state government that ended up spoiling things in California and driving them out.
It is an interesting phenomenon. We'll swing back around to Larry. I want to ask him that question too, but let's go to Neil McCabe first. Neil, what about that train of thought? Now I personally know I did a lot of business in Mexico at some of the maquiladoros down there over the years when I ran my business and hauled a lot of freight out of Mexico. It was before the drug wars got very, very dangerous down there, but I used to find myself in Juarez, Mexico on a number of occasions, and I know a lot of those individuals down there and a lot of very good people down there who are on this side of the border, who have families in Juarez, who are very pro-gun and are close friends of mine to this day. But they're here and born in America with family in Juarez. Well, what about those families? What's with the phenomena? What's your take on that question?
Well, of course, in that area, of course, is right by Fort Bliss, and there's huge interaction there. A lot of Mexican, a lot of soldiers down there end up marrying Mexican girls, as happens. But, all of the drug lords actually live on the American side of the border. That's sort of the funny part.
Is there a possibility that they might embrace our Second Amendment freedoms because those are freedoms that they've never had? Just posing that question, want to get your response.
I would think that it's a natural thing to want to protect yourself and your family, and given the opportunity, you would embrace it. if that was properly communicated to you.
There's the kicker right there. Let me leave that. That's right, if it were properly communicated, and of course it's not. This is the dependency class we're talking about. George, you ever sell a gun to a Mexican?
I sold lots of guns to Latinos, quite a bit. They enjoy freedoms. They're just like us. They're good, hardworking, conservative people at heart. They've just been politically brainwashed to vote Democrat because they think that's where they're getting their benefits.
And that's the 85%, George,
it is.
that they know will keep Democrats in power. Whether that portion is pro-gun or not, their bigger issue will be their dependency on the federal government. Eric Holder, there's a great article here on hotair.com. It was posted by a gentleman by the name of Noah Rothman, and it's titled, On His Way Out the Door, Eric Holder Race Baits One Last Time. Fantastic piece posted on February 27th. Outgoing Attorney General Eric Holder just couldn't help himself. Of course, Eric Holder couldn't get convictions because the bar's too high at the federal level to go after George Zimmerman and to go after the police officer in Missouri and so forth and on and on and on. Here's what Holder said. I think some serious consideration needs to be given to the standard of proof that has to be met before federal involvement is appropriate, and that's something that I am going to be talking about before I leave office. Although federal civil rights law imposes a high legal bar in these types of cases, we have resisted forming premature conclusions. Well, let me tell you something. Larry Pratt, this is indicative of this entire administration's philosophy on governing. If you don't like the law, just change it to suit your needs. We don't care that the bar is high. The bar is high for a reason. Now, of course, he was referring to Zimmerman and the fact that they had to drop all charges because Zimmerman was exonerated by a jury, but that's not good enough for Eric Holder. They wanted to make an example of him. He flat out admits that. Now he wants to change the law to make that possible. What does that tell us about the dangers of this administration on all kinds of fronts?
I would want to broaden my concern that while this is the most virulent administration, it's been something that Republicans very unwisely years ago began beating the drum of law and order, beating the Democrats over the head with it, saying that they were soft on crime, when what they were really saying is you're soft on crime because you don't agree with criminalizing actions at the federal level that should have only ever remained at the state level. The Constitution doesn't give street crime jurisdiction to the federal government. And yet that's what a lot of these police agencies here in Washington are doing. And I think we'd better inform ourselves about how dangerous that is. Otherwise, we're going to have some kind of unitary, centralized state where we might as well call it the KGB or the NKVD that is controlled from the center, and state agencies and county and local police agencies become nothing but extensions of the central government's power.
David Codry, isn't that what they're trying to do? Isn't that their goal?
Sure, and we see it with the fusion centers that have the feds come in and basically spoon-feed Southern Poverty Law Center propaganda, which is why when we have this, true existential threat of the Islamic State, that's threatening to shoot up malls in this country or blow up malls in this country, and they're coming in again over an unsecured border, and they're also coming in through immigration programs where they're refugees, and we find out that they've been lied about, and so that we get these Somalis in here that lied to get into this country. And the bottom line is that they are setting up a situation where the crime is going to happen so that they can then say, well, we need more gun control. It's nuts what's going on, Mark.
It really is, and I love the fact that you're ahead of me on these topics here, because my next set of questions for you guys is the direct threat posed by ISIS. I'm really looking forward to hearing Larry's comments about what I said last week on the air. I'll go there in a moment. Neil McCabe. We don't like the law. We want to get a conviction, but we can't under the law. Well, the law needs to be rewritten so that we can get a conviction. Justice be damned.
Well, I think that's scary for any American citizen that hears that the Attorney General is concerned that he needs too much evidence before he convicts you. I mean, that's just a scary, scary thing. As for this sort of police state, Larry, and I'm sure a lot of people walking around Washington, D.C. are familiar with these tiger teams of Homeland Security guys, full battle rattle, walking around Union Station, the airport, downtown Washington. Who are these guys? I mean, they're not D.C. police. They're not FBI. We now have a Homeland Security police force that is now active on the sidewalks. And they walk around. They literally walk around like paramilitaries.
I've met these guys. I've had MP5 submachine guns topped with EOTech optical gun sights aimed in my direction because they thought that me and my friends on the way to SHOT Show might be a threat.
George, I want you to tell that story. You've got a couple minutes. Go ahead and tell that story briefly.
We were on our way down to SHOT Show a couple years ago. I was driving my friend's truck, and he was operating a kind of an online gun accessory store, not selling guns, but selling accessories. And he had bought some stuff from China. Well, Homeland Security decided to do a sting, and we met these guys thinking we're going to do a business transaction in St. George on the way down there. And they wanted to do a sting operation on my friend, and I was caught in the middle of this. They basically jumped us, armed to the teeth with some of the hottest weapons that you could get. And it was Homeland Security, but to make it legal, they had a couple guys from the local police force there doing the official arrest. Well, it wasn't an arrest, it was a detainment, and then conducting the official investigation or whatever they were doing. But it was co-opting the local guys to make it all legit.
In short order, though, I say that now, I have to interrupt now because of time. I want to go back to Larry on this before we close out. Everybody was exonerated. It was a mistake. You guys had fully automatic, very hot weapons pointed at you by basically a Barack Obama police force. Larry Pratt, does that surprise you in today's America?
Unhappily, no, and that's why we have a number of counties across the country, one not far from me in Carroll County, Maryland, where the county fathers have said that they are not going to lift a finger to do anything to help a federal operation of the sort that was just described. And I said to one of the county supervisors, commissioners, well, I appreciate the sentiment, but I said, what good does your disapproval really make? What difference does that make? And he said, well, actually it makes a lot of difference because the feds, with all of the might and all of the numbers that they have across the country, are spread too thin.
Larry, I'm sorry I had to cut you off at the break. I'd like you to finish that thought if you would.
Basically, we're talking about nullification, and if a county sheriff, if a body of county commissioners, even a state government, understand that they are not going to go along with federal activity that's unconstitutional, and they tell them ahead of time, that's often, not always, but that's often going to be enough to keep that kind of bad stuff from happening. Had the local sheriff at Waco been of this mind, arguably, it wouldn't have happened at all, and it certainly might have turned out rather differently had it even begun the way it did, because the local sheriff was critical in everything that was happening down there in Waco. Conversely, in Bunkerville, Nevada, the local sheriff was kind of comme c'est comme ça, but he at least didn't really get in the way of armed citizens providing security for Clive and Bundy as the BLM was attacking his ranch. Right? They couldn't wait to get through court. Rather than get a judicial decision even, they were there with their fully automatic rifles ready to gun down unarmed ranchers who were there to defend Clive and Bundy. And it didn't work for them. The slogan in Bunkerville was, "No more free Wacos." And I think the feds realized that there were armed people with rifles bearing down on them. The ones riding to the corral to free the cattle that they had stolen from Bundy were unarmed, and they would have been faced with the prospect of gunning down unarmed men and women on those horsebacks, riding horseback. So the fact is, we can and we have nullified unconstitutional federal action, but it takes that kind of determination, and it's aided greatly when somebody like this Maryland County Board of Commissioners said, we're not going to participate. You're on your own. You guys are not going to have our cooperation to do those kind of things.
We've discussed that many times on this program, and it bears reminding to folks, it bears a reminder to you that the sheriff is the supreme law of the land in his or her county. The sheriff says yes or no. And it is amazing how effective an armed populace is. David Codrea, you had a question for Larry Pratt. I'll turn it over to you.
Well, basically, it goes back to the amnesty issue. And one of the important things that people need to be aware of is that right now the Republicans in Congress are being pressured to pass this DHS funding. And there has been a break-off of probably about 50 or so Republicans who say, no, we have to separate Obama's amnesty from this. We will fund DHS, but without that. They are allowing the Obama administration to cow them into giving him the whole deal, which is then going to fund this amnesty and make all of this stuff that we were talking about come to pass. One of the reasons I would wish that the congressman who was on in hour 2 had been able to come on a second segment and maybe get into some of this, because I would like to appeal to him to please change his vote and to come on the side of the people who are appealing to separate the amnesty from the entire DHS package. And my question, I guess, for Larry, with the other gun rights organizations not getting behind this, one of the things I've been beating on is scoring politicians for their vote. I know that there are pro-gun politicians that get A ratings and things like that, but should not the amnesty also be a part of the way that these people are scored?
Well, the answer you're going to get from us at Gun Owners of America is absolutely should be part of the scoring, and it's something that we plan on including in our rating of Congress this and next year, because as we've already discussed, if we don't block this amnesty move now, before we get 5-8 million previously illegal aliens now voting, 85% of whom are, they tell pollsters, going to vote for anti-gun Democrats. That's the ball game. That's it. We lose our Second Amendment. It doesn't matter whether it's still in the Constitution in writing or not. The National Archives can't protect it from this kind of assault.
Kate was beautiful, kind, happy, caring, loving, and deep in faith. Kate had a special soul, a kind and giving heart, the most contagious laugh, and a smile that would light up a room. Kate loved to travel, spend time with her friends, and most of all, spend time with her family. In fact, the day she was killed, we were walking arm in arm on Pier 14 in San Francisco, enjoying a wonderful day together. Suddenly, a shot rang out. Kate fell and looked at me and said, "Help me, Dad." Those are the last words I will ever hear from my daughter. Everywhere Kate went throughout the world, she shined the light of a good citizen of the United States of America. Unfortunately, due to disjointed laws and basic incompetence on many levels, the U.S. has suffered a self-inflicted wound in the murder of our daughter by the hand of a person that should have never been on the streets of this country. I say this because the alleged murderer is an undocumented immigrant who has been convicted of 7 felonies in the U.S. and already deported 5 times. Yet in March of this year, he was released from jail and allowed to stay here freely because of those legal loopholes. It's unbelievable to see so many innocent Americans that have been killed by undocumented immigrant felons in the recent years. In fact, we recently come across a statistic that says between 2010 and 2014, 121 criminal aliens who had an active deportation case at the time of release were subsequently charged with homicide-related offenses. Think about that. 121 times over the past 4 years, an illegal immigrant with prior criminal convictions that later went on to be charged with murder when they should have been deported. That is 1 every 12 days. Our family realized the complexity of immigration laws. However, we feel strongly that some legislation should be discussed, enacted, or changed to take these undocumented immigrant felons off our streets for good. We'd be proud to see Kate's name associated with some of this new legislation. We feel if Kate's law saves 1 daughter, 1 son, a mother, a father, Kate's death won't be in vain.
20 meetings with legal experts, immigration advocates, business leaders to gather ideas on what should be included in his order. So who are these so-called experts, advocates, and business leaders? They're not the law enforcement officers. They're not our ICE officers. They're not our Border Patrol officers. They're not the American working man and woman. They're not unemployed Americans. They weren't in the room. You can be sure of that. Their opinions weren't sought. No, White House officials are meeting with the world's most powerful and corporate immigration lobbyists and activists who think border controls are for the little people. We know better. The administration is meeting with the elite, the cosmopolitan set, who scorn and mock the concerns of everyday Americans, concerned about their schools, jobs, wages, communities, hospitals. These great and powerful citizens of the world, we know, don't care much about old-fashioned things like national boundaries, national sovereignty, immigration controls, let alone the constitutional separation of powers or even the consistent and even-handed enforcement of plain law. The masters of the universe are very fond of open borders as long as these open borders don't extend to their gated compounds and fenced-off estates. What about the good and decent and patriotic citizens of our country who fight our wars, who obey our laws, who follow our rules, and want a better future for their children? Shouldn't their needs come first? We can't put the parochial demands of a few powerful CEOs ahead of an entire nation's hopes, dreams, and aspirations. The basic social contract is that citizens agree to follow the law, pay their taxes, devote their love and loyalty to their country, and in exchange, the nation commits to preserve and protect and serve their interest, safeguard their freedom, and return to them in kind their first allegiance of loyalty. The job of elected officials is to answer to the people who sent them to Washington, not to scorn them, not to demean them, not to mock them, not to sell their jobs and dreams to the highest bidder.
Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Vote for Jeb, or you're just fucking stupid.